Let me just do this. So everyone, Alejandro, I'll just introduce you properly and then go ahead. So everyone, please meet one of our advisors, one of our trusted advisors, Alejandro, who has actually been our advisor for a few years now, and has been sort of advising myself and the business. And when he was a student at university, not that long ago, hey, Alejandro, he used to run hackathons for students. And this is how I felt like, you know, it was so aligned, our visions, except what I'm doing is we're running hackathons for teenagers. But Alejandro has also been sort of traveling around the world and running these kind of programs for years before I started doing this. And he's also the founder of the Ethical Institute, which is obviously pioneering research around ethics in ML. So you definitely should sign up to his newsletter. It can be very technical. I receive it on a, weekly or bi-weekly basis. And you already have lots of subscribers. And it's a really great one to subscribe to, and definitely follow him on Twitter. He's very active in all things ethics and AI. So he promised a kind of technical talk today. Alejandro, what is it going to be about this time?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think there was some suggestions to do a deeper dive into like GPU acceleration, but that would be a little bit too dry for
Friday
like a Friday
evening. Friday.
Yeah,
it's quite heavy.
I was thinking probably the best content. I recently did a keynote at the EuroPython as well as PyData Global, basically talking about still the sort of like technical content that is sort of being learned, but specifically from a practitioner perspective of what you can do to ensure you are actually developing using the best practices, and how to actually set those best practices and emerging technologies. So I think that probably, or at least I thought that would be the best fit. But yeah, if not, I'm also happy to go back to that GPU acceleration dry talk.
We'll invite you again for that one. I think that will be quite a technical one, but let's see how we go with this tribe of very curious kids, and we're going to ask some more to join. And thank you so much, Alejandro, for doing this once again. Over to you.
No, thank you for having me as always. Awesome. Okay, well, so I shall get started. And I mean, I think for anyone on the call, please feel free to just ask questions on the chat as you go, and also feel free to unmute yourself and ask any questions. I'm more than happy to go into a tangent if there is more interest towards that. So yeah, feel free to ask any questions, even if it's not related. I'll be able to answer them. Okay, well, so let's get started. As Elena mentioned, my name is Alejandro. I am engineering director at Selden, where I lead teams of machine learning engineers, and chief scientist at the Institute for Ethical AI. I'm also governing council member at large at the ACM. Coincidentally, today we actually published a consultation submission for the European Commission's regulatory proposal for AI regulation. And ultimately, the objective is to ensure we contribute to the ongoing discourse for just how this technology is used. But today, what we're going to be talking about is you, right? And what I mean by that is particularly on the context that the work that you will be doing for the next, decades will have a direct impact to global society. And we need to actually really understand that as practitioners, we have a responsibility that goes beyond the lines of code that we write on a weekend or on an accelerator, particularly because this critical infrastructure that in the current days or even in the previous days was running just through control systems or general software, now is starting to adopt more machine learning driven technology. And in this case, irrespective of the number of abstractions and layers that you add into your systems, your impact will always be human, right? And that's something that you are learning within these accelerators. We do need to take into consideration what are the potential impacts that this technology would have. You may have already had some talks that provide an intuition on things like the cybersecurity risks of production systems, particularly in AI, things like adversarial robustness or adversarial attacks that could exploit machine learning models, potential misuse of personal data, the challenge of just outages, right? Perhaps a system that goes down, or even things like bias that goes from humans into the systems themselves, either consciously or unconsciously, most likely the latter. And the impact of a bad solution is always, or a lot of the times, worse than the impact of no solution at all, right? So it's something that we will need to consider, that as you are learning how to build AI systems and AI solutions, to understand what are the ways in which you can also assess where the solution may be a good or bad fit. And as a practitioner, you may think to yourself, well, I'm just participating in this event this weekend. How would my actions have any effect anywhere, right? So when you think about it, even if you yourself as an individual may have the best intentions, that doesn't mean that as a collective, i.e. a team or even an organization, may have the collective positive outcomes that you were intending to have. An ethical individual doesn't mean an ethical organization or compound, right? And we have seen in a lot of situations where perhaps a team of technologists may have tried to develop something in the best intentions, but end up having a bad outcome, right? So as an individual practitioner, you do have some responsibilities and actions that you can take, basically learning the technology best practices. In this event, that you're learning not just the coding best practices, but also the sort of intuition of the product best practices, the solutions, and how to even build sustainable capabilities around it. Then as a team, you have the ability to understand how each of your skill sets feeds into the ability to actually create solutions. So you need to understand what are the cross-functional interactions involved. And then at an organizational level or industry level, once you put your solution out there, what are the different interplays that it may have, and perhaps any divergence that it may incur, such that it could have an effect that may change in the near to long term, right? In the case of some, for example, NLP, text, AI systems, you may actually have some challenges with the fact that language in itself evolves as time goes on, right? So perhaps a word that may have meant something good today may actually change into something bad tomorrow, well, not tomorrow, but maybe in 10 years, right? So a model that you may deploy on that may also have to take into considerations how the ecosystem in which it works affects it. And for example, in this case, it could be just a model, but it could also be a system where the model is actually operating on. Now, from that perspective, it is also worth taking into consideration how practitioners may interact when it comes to the work that they're doing, as well as other players. Not everybody, as you can see here, may have the best intentions at hand. And in some cases, people that may have the best intentions, they may not have the right tools at their disposals to be able to make sure that their outcomes are as positive as they would expect them to be. So it is important to ensure that not only you're able to have the best intention in mind, but also making sure that you are able to identify the right tools and best practices. And as practitioners, we do have a growing professional responsibility. This is not just coders, this is not just data scientists, but this is all the individuals in the teams that are interacting as part of that. And we have to go beyond the algorithms themselves. As we can't just say, hey, the data scientist that is training the model, if something goes wrong, is the fault of the data scientist, right? because large ethical challenges, cannot fall just under the shoulders of a single practitioner. There needs to be the right touch points. There is a question that says, but are not all machine learning models built to be adaptable, i.e. in spam detection systems, reprogramming is not considered. The model recognizes new words that are used in spamming. So that's actually a great question. It really depends on the context, because you have some models that may be trained once and deployed with a static, in this case, internal weights. However, there are some online learning models, perhaps in the context of reinforcement learning, that you may actually require some of the existing environment to actually tune its internal state. However, for both cases, whether it is the static one or the active learning one, there is still a challenge for a divergence in performance. And there needs to be a consideration of when do you need to actually check whether it is manually or automatically that the actual distribution that you're seeing in production still fits the initial assumptions, right? Because you can still have a model that is continuously actively learning, but if the divergence of the environment, of the distribution of that production data still shifts, that learning may still be diverging, right? So it may still be learning, but it may not be adapting itself to what you would expect or require for it to adapt to. So from that perspective, it is a balance of making sure not only you have the right touch points to, whether automatic or manual, to check that it's still, with the same assumptions and the assumptions are correct, but also the cost involved on you adding those checks, right? You cannot, have, infinite amount of resources to always have that check. So it has to be proportionate to the risk that is involved. But yeah, that's a really good question. You have different types of models, each with different heuristics that, some may adapt, some may not. And even when they do, you do have some considerations to have in mind. Now, you have to take in place kind of this end-to-end approach where you are able to not just leverage the underlying tools, software, frameworks, open source software, closed source software, but also understand how that actually maps into the context in which you're using it at. And then how that actually goes to the higher level principles, right? So if you say, okay, I want to develop a system that is going to be for everyone, that is going to be that, diverse in its core, that is going to be built by, multiple people from different backgrounds. But then when it comes to the more practical aspect, it is ensuring that it goes just beyond you saying, okay, I want it to just be, diverse, is making sure that it actually maps with the underlying nuances of what you choose for the core components. And, you get into the terminology of ethics or principles, but from that perspective, it is making sure that there is a high level understanding for alignment across multiple, different diverse backgrounds. In the context in which we operate, which is open source software, it is developed from a global community, right? So you may have someone, in China, someone in Mexico, someone in the US, someone in the UK, all contributing to the code, all with that sort of higher level principle, but coming from different perspectives, right? So understanding what those perspectives are would allow only for greater alignment, right? And this is where it comes to really being able to empathize with individuals that have different, insights into different areas, but being able to come into that understanding can only provide deeper, meaningful connections with the people that are actually contributing to the same components. And, this is not something that you can have to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of resources available. The organization that I mentioned, the ACM, as well as the Institute for Ethical AI, we published a set of code of ethics and professional conduct that you can follow and you can find online, which I think, it's fantastic. And ultimately, you do have kind of like situations where organizations or individuals may say, well, why would I follow this, ethical guidelines or ethics guidelines or principles, if that may either just be kind of, hyped terminology, or perhaps it may just cause a lot of red tape. But the reality is that when you look at those guidelines, there are things like, maintain high standards, strive to achieve high quality, and you would have to ask yourself whether following some of this wouldn't end up achieving better outcome, right? So ultimately, it can only provide better outcomes towards that. You have a lot of different players that are trying to propose different sort of standards. You have different sort of like organizations publishing their own, including ours. But at the same time, there are patterns and trends that all align. They all emphasize reproducibility, transparency, the things that you would actually, as practitioners, really care about. And similarly, you can actually go one level deeper into not just principles, but things that you may have heard as standards, right? Standards are everywhere. This could be simple things like, I'm sure people here may have already used programming languages. I mean, I know that, in hackathons, you guys are already building a lot of stuff with Python, as well as perhaps some of the more adventurous ones in other languages, maybe C++, others in JavaScript. Languages themselves are also a standard that gets furthered by practitioners like yourselves or like ourselves. And you can contribute to this. You can contribute to language design. You can contribute to language standards. You can also contribute to standards that ensure the principles that we discussed, such as standards for algorithmic bias, right? Making sure that projects, as they get created, they have a set of processes to ensure that, of course, bias cannot be removed completely, but it can be mitigated, right? So for models that perhaps may use some data sets, that there are some touch points to identify whether there are some potential divergence, some potential, conscious or unconscious bias within the data that is being used or within the decisions that are being made. And similarly, the standards doesn't have to be just for principles like that. It could also be for reproducibility, for security, for privacy, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, you can get involved with a lot of this as practitioners, even as just individuals participating in a hackathon. There's a lot of bodies that allow you to actually get involved, similar to open source, just for you to actually contribute. And if it is not for something, I know that standards are not going to be the most exciting. I think the more sort of tangible thing that you can get involved with, especially in the AI space, is with the open source ecosystem, right? And this is with libraries that you have seen, like not just TensorFlow or scikit-learn, but even the smaller ones that perhaps you may find useful and contribute to. There's a question that says, are there current standards for protection against adversarial attacks when developing ML models? So there's actually some standards that have been developed with the ISO for security in AI. I think it is in the ISO, which try to identify in some ways best practices as well as risks that may be involved with things like adversarial attacks. And there are some initiatives that are exploring it more on the lower level. If you want to get involved in those type of libraries, I would actually in those type of discussions, I would actually recommend more in the open source frameworks, open source libraries, particularly as those are actually trying to explore what are the practical tooling that can help in those contexts. And from that perspective, the interesting thing about open source is that we are now seeing a massive uptake and increase in these tools, but also in the practitioners that develop them. They are starting to be seen as important thought leaders in industry. And this is because open source is now becoming the backbone for our society, right? Any Linux system may be running that. Any AI system may also be running some of the open source. So right now, that is why it's important to ensure those higher level principles are mapped down with the respective open source frameworks that are developed. So the one that we were discussing with Elena, so we developed a low level GPU acceleration framework that allows for cross-platform, GPU computing. Ultimately, that was created particularly to start some discussions. How do we achieve cross-platform GPU acceleration for machine learning? We were interested, and instead of actually just maybe creating like a meetup or a panel, we ended up just creating a piece of software that attracts people to contribute to that, and then in turn advances and answers some questions around that. And similarly, there could be some work that comes out of this accelerator that you may choose to actually open source either as a whole or as a specific library or functionality. And that is basically yourself already contributing to furthering a discussion around that particular tooling, which I think is very cool. So that's basically some of the key insights of the open source. I don't know if someone is trying to ask a question or just trying to unmute themselves. No, I think it's fine. But yeah, feel free to unmute yourself if you do have a question. So we are now starting to see that there's a lot of organizations, particularly in the AI space. I know that it's really hard to see, but that organizations like Google, like Microsoft, like even Tencent and Alibaba, which are East Asian-based, Chinese organizations, they are actually seeing open source as a really serious way to further some of those technical discussions. And we can see some projects like TensorFlow, PyTorch, but also some others like WePy or Druid, right, from these libraries. The cool thing about this is that you can get involved, and you don't have to actually get involved just through a foundation. You can actually get involved by just contributing your own code and open sourcing it, right? So if you already have a GitHub, you can actually start open sourcing your own work. So that's one of the great things about this. So I think with that, I want to just pause here to see if you have any questions, and I will then dive into a more practical overview of some of the different components. So I'll just pause there for a couple of seconds, and I'm going to just check also because I think my internet is having some issues. Just going to switch on the Wi-Fi really quickly, so it's going to have a bit of a lag. All right, I think I'm back. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
All right, I think I'm back now. Sorry for that. I think my internet just dropped, but I just switched network. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Awesome. Yeah, so I think my internet just dropped, but yeah, I just want to kind of like give some time for any questions if people have specifically around getting involved in open source in particular. I think today what I wanted to do is provide kind of like a bit of a intuition of how people can start getting into contributing into more technical projects. And I'm also curious to see if people have already been involved and contributing into any of the open source projects out there, as that is, personally, one of the ways that I had wished I was able to get involved into the programming space much earlier, particularly given that when it comes to, like software and more specifically open source communities, it tends to be quite easy to find what would be either mentors or even like-minded individuals and communities to actually, get that type of interaction So yeah, I think that's the main sort of premise that I want people to be able to come out of that. And even more specifically, yeah, in order to get started with open source, I myself, through both Selden and the Institute, we have a set of open source projects that if you are interested on just getting involved and trying out an easy way of contributing, we actually curate a set of lists. One of them, which is basically just a simple, I'm just going to share it, a simple, repo with a lot of different open source machine learning frameworks. This is probably like a simpler way of trying out what would be, basically what is their contributions. So we would be more than happy to welcome anyone to add a pull request for any libraries, or even if it is just a syntax correction of an issue. And this is just kind of like to get people started. So please feel free to reach out to either myself or anyone in other communities, and we will be more than happy to help you get started with your first open source contributions. So with that, I just want to pause there, see if there's any questions, particularly around just the, I guess, open source contributions, how to get started, and if there are any other areas of interest. So I'll just pause there for a bit. Mm-hmm. I think, Ayesha, you have a hand up?
Maybe that was Ayesha. Do you want to ask a question? I also saw a hand up. Okay, maybe not.
Awesome. Well, I mean, I think with that silence, we can assume everybody is ready for their first contributions to open source. So we'll be looking forward. Okay, so I think Ayesha just commented. So saying, yes, I want to know about open source. So yeah, I think to what I mentioned, what makes open source is, as the name implies, basically two things. One, which is a general definition, and two, which is the formal definition. The first one, it just means that the source of your code or of your work is publicly available, and more specifically available for contributions. However, the second, which is why I mentioned the second one, is that there is actually a formal definition for open source, and that is basically encompassed by the open source licenses that basically outline the copyright provisions. And what that means is, as you know, copyright is, and it's not the formal definition, the sort of right that you have to the work that you create. And with open source, particularly with some of the initial licenses that came up, they created sort of like a play of words on this terminology which they called copyleft, right? Which is just kind of like a pun, which means that they are able to switch and the definition of copyright and leverage it to say, well, every work that I put out there, I am able to make it available for anyone to use however they want and be able to modify it however they want, as long as they follow perhaps a reference to my previous work. So from that perspective, what this allows you to do is to make code available for other people to benefit from. And in this case, it is interesting because this is actually not code. This is actually, well, a code file that contains just a list of ecosystem tools for machine learning. And if you're interested to actually contribute, it is as easy as just going to here and being able to say, oh, actually, well, I want to, perhaps add a new change. which in this case, let's just make something quickly. That says, awesome production machine learning. Maybe I found like a typo and I say, okay, I want to add this exclamation mark. I want to then, open a commit or a contribution request. And I say, adding exclamation. And when I propose the changes, this would actually be sent to the people that, are responsible for this specific project. And they would be able to see, oh, okay, well, a stranger in the internet, maybe not a stranger, has basically contributed this specific change into my project. And I know that for many people that are currently using, code and even GitHub to host their projects, which I know that Elena has always encouraged from several of the other events, may already be quite familiar with this workflow. But just the emphasis that this is not just restricted to coders in particular. It could be for any individual that wants to make their work available, especially for others to actually use. And this is also potentially relevant for creative minds that may also want to make some of their work available. So here you can see basically that change. So I don't know if that kind of, Aisha, gave you a bit of an intuition of what open source encompasses from a high level sense, and that answered. Awesome. And Elena is just kind of like reinforcing the point of every team should have a GitHub account, all the code should be open source. And I think that's absolutely fantastic, particularly given that it will allow, if anything, for code to outlive the event itself, right? And it serves as a portfolio, it serves as quite a lot of different benefits. So and okay, Aisha, I think you've confirmed that this actually gave you some intuition. I think there's another hand up. I don't know if you had a follow-up question. Awesome. Well, I mean, I think, I don't know if there are other questions that are still coming in. I don't know if there's still other questions that are coming in, but yeah, I'm happy to, answer any other. Okay, and then Elena is also following up with making sure that everything is into the project code as opposed to individual accounts. And I think, yeah, that is one of the beauties of open source, that you're able to collaborate also easily through platforms like GitHub or GitLab, or just your own Git server like Gitia, right? So if you want actually an open source project to host your open source, we actually use this quite a lot at Selden. So it's always a great set of things. There's just so much. Available in open source, and right now it's exploding, not just in the AI space, but a lot of, again, creative minds are creating alternatives of software in open source, right? Projects like Blender to do kind of like open source 3D, well, actually not open source, just 3D animations and designs, but also other projects that are creating email clients or whatever. Around that. And I think, yeah, Elena is also mentioning one of the benefits of hosting your code not locally but remotely, that you avoid someone accidentally removing and deleting and losing all of the work that you've done so far, right? So yeah, and as I mentioned, you can find a lot of our open source projects here. We have an AI explainability framework that we've created here, and then similarly, within Selden, we have a lot of open source projects that we've created that we run our business through, which I think is also very cool, right? An organization that now is able to put all of their code out there and still have a business model that is sustainable, right? That generates revenue and income but that is actually open source and available. So this should give a lot of, if anything, reassurance for people that are currently just building their code. It's not just something that you're going to just put out there and it gets lost. So yeah. And as I said, my email address is and Twitter is available here. If anyone has any sort of questions throughout the accelerator or after, more than happy to point you in the right direction or answer any questions as well.
Alejandro, I have a question. I remember you shared with me this really amazing, it's also open source, and I think you're managing that list of some of these stupid mistakes within the ethical space, some really horrible things that keep coming up in press or whatnot. Do you remember you shared? I think it's on GitHub, and I think it's on I can't remember what it's called now. But you shared.
So there's two. AI. Yeah, so there's this one called Awful AI.
Please, I would be really grateful so that everyone can just have access to that.
Okay, I'll share it in the chat as well. Yeah, but I think this just emphasizes how, for leveraging GitHub, you're able to not just put code, but you can also put and you can initiate a discourse, right? You can initiate a conversation, a discussion, and further a particular topic, such as this one, right? Like this one is basically, we want to collate resources on awful AI, right? And we also have one that outlines some of the higher level AI guidelines, right? So this is basically higher level guidelines about, whether it is regulation and policy, online courses, research industry newsletters, etc. So yeah, not all has to be code, right? But some is code, right? And some is like the framework that I mentioned about GPU acceleration that we also lead. But this is one that is probably out of scope for this talk. But yeah. Awesome. Okay, well, so I think Elena is dropping off now. So yeah, I'm happy to stick around in case anyone else has questions, but I'm also conscious that it is a Friday, in case people are eager to go back to either working on your projects, contributing to open source, or otherwise. I'm happy to do either. But yeah, maybe I'll still stick around for a couple more minutes. If you guys have any questions, put them on the chat. Feel free to unmute yourselves, and I'm happy to answer any. So, okay, so there's another question. Can you tell some kind of library to use? So there's many libraries that you could use. It depends what you want to do. If you want to actually do some AI related work, this sort of list that I shared earlier actually has one of the most comprehensive overviews of different tools for different use cases. And yeah, so the majority is actually in Python. The majority of these tools are in Python. So you would find libraries to do explainability, to be able to explain how a model predicts what it predicted. You can do privacy preserving machine learning. You can do versioning of your data and your models. You can do training, etc., etc. So yeah, I think Elena is just emphasizing, like, yeah, if you have any questions, I'm gonna be answering them for the next couple of minutes. But yeah, so this list actually contains all of the Python libraries that you may want to try out. And if anything, if you're new to this space, these are the topics that in the AI space right now are very prevalent, right? I think earlier, Mohammed was asking about adversarial robustness. There is a section specifically on adversarial robustness. So where is that? Yeah, adversarial robustness here. So there's a bunch of libraries that then you can check here. So this is actually one of our libraries. Whoops. Let me just find it again. Adversarial robustness. So this is actually one of our libraries at Selden that we have built. And this has a broad set of techniques for adversarial detection, but also for outlier detection, right? And if you're curious on that topic, I also have a talk online that dives into this area. And one of my colleagues actually did a very good talk about outlier detection, which is still slightly orthogonal to adversarial detection, but within the same library. So I don't know if that answered your question, Aisha. I just shared basically that list. And yeah, I think before I forget, if you remember, I just added this exclamation mark. I actually don't think, I don't think we want this. So I'm just going to reject this contribution, right? So this is basically me saying, no, I don't want that right now. And if you can see here, actually, I mean, for people that, already know about open source and GitHub and whatnot, you may already be familiar with what the workflow is. For the people that are not as familiar, you can see that in this list that we maintain, we already have some random people in the internet adding suggestions, adding contribution submissions, right? So this person over here, is basically saying, hey, my name is, Striker Rus username from Russia. I don't know that person, but they're making this contribution to say, hey, there is this new project that you don't have there, which is pretty popular. And what does it do? It basically transforms model into Java, C, Python with no dependency. So this is really interesting. And we can actually see that the contribution that is being done is on there, this section of model serving and monitoring. So, okay, so I want to get some thoughts from the people in this call. Do you think we should accept this? Do you think we should accept this contribution? Maybe say yes if you think we should, or say no if you think we should reject that contribution. So let's see what people's what people's thoughts are. Okay, so Bander saying yes. Aisha is saying yes. I think yes, why not, right? Because here we have, it's in a good format, right? So normally I check what the format is. So the format is the link. The link is correct. The actual stars are correct. It says a lightweight library, which allows transpiled. And also, is it in alphabetical order? Yes, it is. So it looks good. So I'm going to say thank you. Thank you, Striker. So I thanked him, and then I merged it. So now what happens is I've accepted his contribution. This is now part of the core. And if I go back and I check, what was the name? M2? M2. Okay, so now it's there. So we can see that model serving and monitoring, M2 CGen is there. So even though I clicked the button, it was actually, your contribution. So you've now helped me contribute to open source. How cool is that? So you are now all, I mean, if you weren't already, maybe you already were contributors, but you've now contributed to open source. So now you can update your LinkedIn and your CVs to say that you are an open source contributor. Indirectly, but I think that's the important thing, right? Is like, to contribute to open source, you don't have to always be the one writing code or accepting contributions. You can actually just join the working group calls. You can actually just add suggestions, and here we can actually see that there are people adding suggestions. Oh, actually, this one is even called suggestion. So while these ones are change requests, these ones are just issues or suggestions. So this one is basically someone that says, suggestion, add a vector database section. Oh, and this is really cool. And then it says, okay, well, vector databases are now familiar. And there are some people that agree. So maybe we'll have a look at this and add a new section, right? So this is basically how you can contribute to the AI discussions. It doesn't 100% have to be you writing the code or you accepting the code changes. If anything, there are some very prevalent and famous open source programmers that they are just so busy that all they do is reply to emails, right? And, you know, accept pull requests or reject them, mostly reject them. But yeah, so I think that's an interesting thing and sad, right? Because we all like writing code. The last thing we want to do is just end up writing emails, right? So yeah, so this is kind of like a little bit of an overview. Now, it would be great if you can actually go and try to contribute in your own ways, because it's super easy, right? It only takes your own account. So I think with that, yeah, I just want to see what are people's thoughts. Do you have any other sort of suggestions? I mean, if you want, we can actually have a look at a code, a code contribution. I think most of them are going to be mine. Oh no, actually, this is a code contribution from someone adding a naive matrix multiplication example on the GPU acceleration project that I had already mentioned briefly. And we can see the code here. We can be like, oh, this is great, great code, right? And we can just start a review or not. Yeah, but we're not gonna say great code. So yeah, so I want to pause there, because remember, this is your session, and I don't want to keep you for we're already 20 minutes over. So I just want to see if there are any other things that people are interested on, that you would be curious about in the context of AI and open source. So I'll just pause there to see if there's any further thoughts or questions. No thoughts anymore? Yeah, I think it's often harder to know if people actually are just looking at this completely baffled, or whether it is all well and understood. Yeah, maybe let's give it a couple more minutes. Also, if any questions about other Python libraries, happy to answer them. Right. It sounds, or it seems like there's no more questions. So I'm just wondering whether we would wrap it up, or whether we want to continue, because I think, yeah, Lena is now off, so it's now just me with the host button. So yeah, I don't know if some of the people that have been interacting, I think Bander, Ayesha, Ellen, yeah, what do you guys think? You guys want to see something else, or should we wrap up? Awesome. Yeah, I think there's consensus now. So no, thank you, everybody. I mean, as I said, I'm on Twitter, I'm on email. If anything, oh, it's great. Yeah, well, this was really good engagement as well. So I'm really keen, to provide any guidance for anyone that has questions. And yeah, I think it's great. Yeah, that people are finding about open source. You know, I love it. I've been contributing for quite a long time, and I wish I started earlier, because it's just great. You know, there's now this Discords. You can just join and chat and find like-minded people, talk about things that you're interested about, which is just really cool. So with that, thank you, everybody. I will stop sharing my screen. And I don't know if I'll press the button.
I can just end it if you want to.
Well, I don't know. I mean, like, I'm happy to pass you the host and then you can keep it going. But I think there's consensus that we can wrap up. So I think that'll be on a good note.
Well, thank you very much.
No, thank you. And thank you, everybody. Hope you have a good weekend.
You too. Goodbye.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.